huge update to the game because of the localized inventory that's going to totally change the game. There are several aspects to this, and that starts with, I'd say, the personal inventory manager that Rich Tyrer and the actor feature team have put so much work into. They're going to cover that in a separate discussion, so we'll leave that out of here. Over on our side, we've got the vehicle loadout manager, which has been adapted to only allow you to modify vehicles that are in your immediate vicinity. And then we've also added a new mobiGlas app called Knickknacks. Reiniger, so you've spent the last couple of quarters heavily focused on this. Go ahead and walk us through what's changed, starting with the front end menu.
Yeah, so the front end, we've historically allowed players to kind of go wherever they want, right? But as we move forward with the game and the new player experience, we want players to be invested in their home location. So it's more of selecting a home base, because the inventory that you have at the start of your account that's entitled, through all your web purchases, through whatever, subscriber flares, etc. All of this stuff is going to go to that location as it's physicalized in the world. So now you have a home base of operations. That's your place. As we explore out throughout the universe, you may move some of that stuff to a new place as you get persistent halves here, a new hab over there, persistent hangar, right? Players are going to be tangibly going up to, interacting with their weapon rack, interacting with the stuff in their ship. And so localized inventory is a massive change to how they've dealt with the game up till now. Gone are kind of the days of this global inventory that you can go and interact with anywhere in the universe. If your stuff is at Microtech, you need to go to Microtech to do it. If it's in this hangar over here, you got to go to that hangar. So we want players to feel the pressure of prepping for a trip, right? It's as you go out, this is the mission I'm going to do. This is what I need to go and do that mission. So I want to go here, get this, or maybe go to a shop here and buy that. And so the front end is going to be the first step in kind of planting your seed wherever it is in the universe from the very start.
So what about the Knickknacks app? So this allows you to basically, in its first incarnation, to see where you've placed all of your loot throughout the entire solar system. It works on a hierarchical basis, so you can drill down into a particular planet, see the city. At the city, you can basically see what ships you have stored there. You can look within your ship and eventually see what cargo grids and what storage closets you have within there and what items you have placed within there. You've also got a number of filters that allow you to quickly drill down through your entire inventory and find all the the laser rifles or whatever else it is that you're specifically searching for. Can you just walk through that in a little bit more detail?
As we kind of go into the localized inventory, the VMA can only act on the ships that are at that location. You kind of lose perspective of the global view, because the personal inventory manager that the actor feature team has done has removed the PMA, which was also your kind of global view into your personal items. So the Knickknacks app allows you to kind of see where your stuff is distributed around the world at the individual location level. So whether it's in a ship or in a hab or in a hangar, right now the locations are basically cities or stations. Pretty much any place that has a shop that sells items, that can be some place where you can store stuff. So the ships also have their local inventories associated with them, so you can store things in the ship. And the Knickknacks app is good because now if you want to find laser rifles, you can search by type or subtypes. Basically the same things that you see in the shop, so the categories that you see in the shop UIs. That's the same level of interaction and filtering that you'll have in Knickknacks.
We've spoken a bit about how it's going to evolve in the future and what new capabilities we would wind up adding to it. Trading with other players is one of the things that's at the top of the list.
Yeah, right-clicking on something, being able to say, hey, open a trade window with Ben here. I want to be able to show me on the star map where this is. So something that we want to do in the mobiGlas as a whole is context ability to bounce to different apps that are contextually relevant to whatever you're currently using. So
like saying this is in this location when that's just a string, like it's in Olisar, that's not super useful. Seeing that on a map, that tells me something. That tells me I need to go from here to here, I need to plot this location. Right. I'm gonna go through this dangerous area to get there in order to access my stuff.
Or a hyperlink on that.
And you can also very easily discern distance and stuff, which is, oh, well, this one's not here, but is it relatively close, or is it really, really far away? And I need to be able to obviously put that into my planning.
Yeah, or set a route to see how much fuel I'm going to use,
Exactly.
right? There's a lot of different reasons why these things are kind of relevant. We want to try and preserve all those elements that CR really wants to push towards, but still give you the context switching that you're going to need.
Another area that's currently under heavy development is Physicalized Cargo. It consists of multiple facets and will be released in stages, with the first one relating to shop purchases injecting physical entities rather than what I would call render proxies into your ship. This is going to convey all sorts of benefits and advantages, to the gameplay experience. The first and one of the most obvious is simply the fact that now that you've got a ship that has physical entities placed within it, then when another player winds up disabling, boarding your ship, they can actually extract, that cargo from you. There's value there that they can actually take. Whereas right now, the only way to get that value is you have to, blow up the ship, and then we basically, create these cargo facsimiles that basically get blasted out into space, and you have to go collect those, et cetera. And so this starts to hint at things like, the fact that we're going to want to bring NPCs into defending these ships. So all of a sudden, you get this fantastic gameplay transition, what I would say, where you have ships doing this momentum-based combat, and now I can disable a ship, board it, and I actually have to overcome the NPC crew and then physically grab the cargo, haul it back to my ship. At the same time, you're concerned that while you're basically on the ship and lugging this stuff around, that security or allies of the ship that you've disabled might show up and start blasting you. And so all of a sudden, the considerations, just explode, for doing something so right now relatively basic. And it's one of the aspects that I really love about this game, which is how we can add this low-level gameplay mechanic, and in one shot, it's going to totally transform so many different elements of the game.
And we get stuff like the whole sea, which is another hurdle beyond the physicalization of cargo. I think one of the things that just physicalizing the cargo really does is it allows for the gameplay that CR wants, where you're not blowing up ships, right? You're destroying an engine, which is not a critical failure, right? Critical failures are the things that lead to these larger scale destructions, but on average, you're knocking a ship out of commission. You're able to board, you're able to acquire the stuff, you're not killing everybody on the ship just because it got taken down to 0 health, right? So these are all things that just physicalizing the cargo allows us to do.
You mentioned the whole sea. So the whole sea has some unique challenges related to attaching physicalized cargo to it when you're actually docked at a station, or when you're parked in a hangar and its wings are compressed. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So the whole sea, because it does have these two different states, now we have ATC considerations. If I have cargo on the outside of my ship, my wings are exposed, now I can only go to a docking collar. I can't go to the hangar. So the ATC needs to know to route you to these different locations. Showing all this cargo on the outside of a ship beyond, think of adding additional ships to an area and the kind of, slowdown that you might see on a server, right? You're adding more physical objects that can be blown up, can be interacted with. So there's a technical challenge that we need to overcome as well. How they get on there, these are shipping container sized objects that have a real world weight to them. They need a tractor beam that is large enough, probably on an Argo ship, right? So you'll get these little transport ships going from a station's docking, a cargo bay, flying it out to the whole sea, and think of it as a person walking in and out, but it's on a spaceship scale.
Another thing that's really bothered me for quite a while is what I'd call the lack of transactional friction. And what I mean when I say that is that it takes the exact same amount of time to load or unload 1 unit of cargo onto your ship as it does 1,000 or 10,000. There's no friction, in this process. Right. And that's completely different from the real world, where mom and pop retailers and major port facilities, designed to rapidly load or unload, cargo onto, some big, freight ship, are able to move, much larger quantities in a much shorter period of time. And you've got skilled dock workers that, you can actually hire that are trained to basically deal with special types of materials and all that sort of stuff. Where we're eventually going with this is that shop purchases are going to inject physical cargo into a storage space, and it's then up to you, the player, to basically move the stuff from that storage space onto your actual ship. And there are going to be, I would assume that at this point in time, half of the people watching this are saying that sounds incredibly awesome, right? Yeah. And the other half are saying this sounds incredibly tedious, and it sounds like a lot of forced menial labor that's going to be completely completely lacking in fun. There is a method to the madness. I mean, where we're going with this is we're going to make the concept of moving freight onto and off of ships not just a logistical challenge, but we're actually going to make sure that it's a fun experience. Yeah. And this would include everything from eventually adding a service beacon so that you could recruit your friends, your org mates, people you don't know to basically come and help you move cargo. We'll eventually add the ability for NPCs to be hired at that location, and the price will fluctuate depending upon how many other players are requesting similar services. And you can use those types of capabilities if you simply want to pay a certain amount, have your ship loaded or unloaded, and you're going to go fly around and do something completely unrelated. So Dorsey, how is Physicalized Cargo going to impact the gameplay experience?
I mean, in a bunch of ways. As you kind of touched on, there's the whole concept of needing to move cargo from one of those storage areas into that ship. We've actually run into a lot of problems where when you come across a derelict, for instance, we have all these crates on there that you can offload in a lot of the events that we've done. And that amount of time that it takes to do that makes it so that when you then go to sell those crates, they aren't worth the time, frankly.
It's because over time.
Exactly. It is so much faster to just park your ship and click the button and have it instantly get filled, and then drive over to another place and have it instantly be unloaded, that we can't make that process pay well enough to also be balanced when you're getting 16 to 20 crates off of a ship and it's taking you half an hour to do that. But once you make it so that there is a much more similar timeline between those two, you can make it so that there's a much bigger reward on a crate-by-crate basis, and that allows us to make it so that derelicts become a lot more common and offloading stuff becomes a lot more common. There's also just some really great benefits in that we can make missions reward you by putting cargo out there. That's right. It doesn't have to be that the UEC reward of a mission is the only reward. This mission gives you 5,000 every single time. No, there's a ship that gets blown up, or you blow up or disable a ship, and especially disable a ship, and then you can board it and take that cargo off. For pirates, that becomes then the goal. Like, blowing up a ship now becomes almost a failure. You don't want to. You want to disable it, you want to be able to get on it, and then you want to take that cargo off. And of course, the crew is going to be fighting you the entire way there. They're going to have their people to try and fight off your boarding parties. You've suddenly transitioned into an FPS map by doing so, which is this really great transition that just doesn't really happen in a lot of games, and that's amazing. And even just from a pure gameplay system standpoint of carrying that crate, that is a very powerful state for the player to be in that they are vulnerable. You can't be shooting a gun and carrying a crate at the same time.
That's actually one of my favorite things about this entire process is the fact that we're finally going to reward the player and basically provide this differential in the challenges. Yes. Where we've long had, blow the ship up, the ship basically ejects some cargo, you tractor beam it up, and now you basically got your reward. But what it's missing is that transition from FPS from ship-based, momentum-based, combat to where you're shooting your big guns at these things, etc. And now you're sneaking around corners, and you may or may not try to be stealthy, and you're basically trying to extract the cargo out, and the crew's basically coming out of the security areas of the ship and patrolling for you and trying to stop
you also got friends trying to protect each other too, while the other people are trying to move stuff, right? And tractor beams are based on weight, so it may take multiple people to actually move a heavier box. And CR wants the gameplay experience to be less ships blowing up, more this ship got disabled, the engines go out, and unless there's a critical failure, the ship doesn't explode. So the opportunity to board a ship will be more common as we move forward.
There's one other thing I wanted to talk about in this area, and that's, you've heard me talk about this often, which is eventually I want the whole transport occupation to kind of revolve around what I call like a hub and spoke model, to where you've basically got big port facilities that are specifically designed to provide the quantity of inventory and the and all of the infrastructure to quickly get that stuff on and off certain ships, as opposed to small mom and pop retailers that are really just intended to deal in a very small number of items. And one of the more significant problems we have in the game, because we don't yet have that level of realism, is related to we've got a small mom and pop retailer, and we need to have a decent amount of inventory so that it can satisfy demand across potentially 100 different players, all grabbing theoretically 1 or 2 or 3 items. But what happens in the real game right now, because there are none of these limitations, there's none of this transactional friction, is one big ship comes up and it purchases all 300 of them because it takes absolutely no time to do that. It then flies to a destination and it immediately sells it, and it collects only the slimmest of profit margins. But because there was no loading time, there was no unloading time, they can still turn around and make a fairly good return on the amount of invested time they put into it. And turning all of this cargo into physicalized entities and basically adding these logistical challenges to where you have to move stuff on, move it off, you have to be more careful with volatile cargo. Bigger crates will require Argos to move them, or cranes, or forklifts, or whatever the case may be. All of this is ultimately going to push players into being more selective about where, for whatever they're trying to do, what types of shops and stuff they're going to visit. And what you're going to get is just like in the real world, where you'll have super tankers bringing oil from across the ocean and basically parking it at some sort of port facility for offloading. And that will then be transported by, whether it's pipelines, by rail, by those types of things to distribution outlets. And from there, it'll be picked up by trucks and transported to the local gas station. And from the gas station, that's where you, the end consumer, can expect to buy 6 or 12 gallons of gas. But in the real world, you can't drive your truck up to a port refinery on the coast and basically request 5 or 10 gallons of fuel. It's like they only deal in minimum quantities of 10 or 100,000 or 500,000 barrels of fuel. And this will be the same thing that we're going to eventually support on our side, to where if you've got one of these big whole sea ships and stuff, there will be specific locations where we're really basically pushing you to do your business. It doesn't mean that you can't go and park at a small place. It's like, I can have a super tanker and I can go park on the side,
though, right? Because you do have the docking collar restriction on the whole sea type ship, right? But I think this is what going to the per box model will actually do for us, because we can just make those small mom and pop shops only have the smaller volumes of commodities, right?
You talked about how if you can only unload and offload 1 box at a time, I'm not going to do a Caterpillar there.
Yeah,
there's nothing stopping you, but there's something.
That's just
stopping.
If my ship holds 10,000 units of inventory and I don't have any of the automated stuff, and you don't have enough dock workers, I can't hire at this place. There literally aren't 100 NPCs or 500 NPCs that I can hire for any amount of money. They're literally just not there. Then you're going to have to do it yourself, or you're going to have to request some friends to help you. And it's simply too tedious. It's not that we literally prevent you from basically going there and extracting the material. It's that it's simply not going to be worth your time. You're going to have to invest so much time and effort into doing that all of a sudden you would need an astronomically high profit margin. And long before the profit margins on that particular commodity or material get that high, someone else with a smaller, more efficient ship that can more effectively be loaded with a smaller quantity of stuff and then navigate to to another small location to basically sell it, they'll wind up taking that material from that location.
Which means for one of those bigger ships, like one of the Hull series or something, you're going to want to, by just that nature, go to a place that has a cargo elevator that can give you 20 giant crates at the same time.
Yeah, that's what I meant.
That's where you'll make that profit.
With the infrastructure, it's like some places you'll have an elevator that basically gives you easy access to 10 crates at a time, and a bigger facility will have 50, and a bigger one still will have 200. And this one will allow you to basically hire up to 4 NPCs, and one NPC can move 10 crates per hour. But you're going to be in competition with with that small number of NPCs with everybody else, so the price can get fairly high. And this other place will have up to 500 or 1,000 workers that you can hire. So it may still take it may take hours, but you have but that's only because you're loading 10,000 or 100,000 SEU of cargo into your hold. Another very interesting aspect of this is going to be that you're going to have relatively clearly delineated transport routes, supply routes within the system. And this provides us an awesome opportunity to more precisely tailor what types of challenges you should run into when you're basically moving a big freighter ship from point A to point B as opposed to this other location. In other words, if you think about pirates are trying to, abscond. They're basically trying to disable your ship and, and plunder it. Take, whatever valuable materials, you have on board. But the types of ships that would be required to extract, all of the fuel off of a big, massive freighter are clearly dramatically different than the ships that would be needed to effectively and efficiently, plunder a far smaller ship that deals in a totally different, type of item or a totally different, and more limited quantity of items. And so we'll be able to more accurately tailor the gameplay experience so that you get the kinds of challenges you would expect.
Well, and I think by nature, it'll allow it to naturally separate, right? Because it's not worth it over here, and we can make those inventory volumes smaller to match the type of people that we want frequenting those stores. I'm just not going to waste my time. As a large-scale shipper, I'm going to go to the bigger places that can handle it, that can get me in and out faster, that I can hire more people, where there's going to be other people there that I can potentially hire, like the service beacon. It doesn't matter if I'm out in the middle of nowhere because nobody's there to come
that have the specialists. It's only at these select ports where they actually have trained dock workers skilled in in moving volatile cargo. And if you go to a place where you don't have it and you have Joe average NPC try to do it, then you may wind up suffering the consequences of, oh, you lost your cargo, it was blown up, your ship was destroyed, you have to go to insurance, reclaim, et cetera, et cetera. All because you basically tried to use a facility that was not appropriate for for the types of actions you were trying to do.
It's not tailored to it, right? So it's I think it'll be a good change for the game.
The key point from my perspective, though, is as much as possible, we don't want to necessarily make it black and white, right? Which is, it's not that you literally, as the owner of a whole sea, you're not able to buy fuel here. It's more that you can buy it there, but it's going to, if you're buying more than 10 or 20 units of it, it's going to be, you're going to basically have to deal with the repercussions of trying to get all of that stuff onto here. And it's going to take a tremendous amount of time, and you're going to wind up having to pay an exorbitant premium because you're basically going to be depleting them of their entire inventory supply, et cetera. And so it's really just the logistical challenges that you would face trying to exploit non-optimal locations for the unloading or for the loading or unloading of your cargo would simply not be worth it.
Well, and I think another good point is that as you push the inventory to its limits, your bid-ask spread is going to actually be going down as price per unit of the cargo is going to diminish as you get closer and closer to the inventory limits. So it's going to encourage you to go to places with those larger scale inventories so that you can keep your profit margin as high as possible.
We completed the basic foundation for reputation late last year, and followed that up in the first quarter with the release of the Delphi Mobiglass app that allows you to see exactly how different NPCs and organizations feel about you. This is a critical system within the game because it's the key mechanism by which you'll unlock more challenging and lucrative opportunities and gain access to organizations and areas that will bestow various benefits. We're still missing a few key pieces of the puzzle, though, and can't yet fully exploit this system. So over on the mission side, only the bounty hunting services give you a nice gradation of challenges at the moment, offer you more interesting missions as you gain reputation with them. Can you go into a little bit of detail about why this is?
Essentially, whenever we want to make a new mission, or even just a very small variant on a mission, it It requires an entirely new record, a new chunk of data that we have to put into the system, and that takes time. To build out any kind of ladder is an awful amount of time, honestly. Some things that we want to do is just kind of make it so that some of that is more systemic and a little bit faster, and by doing that we will be able to kind of explode wide, making it so that we make one mission, one template, and then just give it some variables that have some ranges. And by doing so, we can then allow it to almost generate its own chains of missions with difficulties that are driven by how much reputation you have, and those can give you different amounts of rewards and spawn different amounts of enemies and put things at different distances, etc. Just kind of dynamicizing that mission variation.
Yeah, and there's actually a lot to this, a lot of additional complication besides the mission itself, because when you think about it, you may have a mission giver, and the mission giver looks at your reputation and decides that he's only going to give you the junior starter missions. And so he calls up the, go kill bad guys in this particular section, and he basically says, you know what, given your reputation, I'm going to assume that you can only take, a difficulty value of 1. And passing a difficulty value of 1 into that mission will only create 1 or 2 guys, and your reward will be of a considerably lower rate than it would, than what it might otherwise be. As you do that mission, you build up reputation with him. All of a sudden, he's passing, higher difficulty levels into that mission template. And one of the complicating factors that we face is we need to be able to take this template, and before we've actually instantiated it, before you've actually accepted it, we need to be able to extract information out of it and process that. And what I mean by that is we need to know, before we've created the mission, how much money you should reasonably be paid in order to do this. And we need to know, we need to have a sense of where this mission might actually take you and what the current status of that area is. Or is he sending you into an area rife with pirates, or is he sending you into an area that's, got tons of security and it's the safest thing in the world?
Or an active supernova, or like any number of things that are terrifying to go.
And this is part of the reason why we've actually made some significant progress on this particular problem, but there are multiple facets to dealing with it. And I'd actually say that at this point, we're in a relatively good place on the underlying, the dynamic mission side, and we've still got a considerable amount of work to do over on the actual UI side to take a mission template, look at your reputation, create some proxy references to that mission template with different metadata associated, and then assuming that you actually select option number 3, which has metadata this, then we'll instantiate the mission, pass in the metadata so that it actually customizes it as appropriate for the selection that you were just shown, and you can then go off and execute that mission, and you'll be paid the correct amount, and you'll encounter the appropriate amount of difficulty for for what you were promised and for what he thought you were capable of doing given your reputational level.
Because we already do have in-game something that players can kind of play with right now, the bounty hunter chain, which is effectively what this will look like to players. It's just a matter of that took a lot of setup, and now it should be something that we can pretty much like click a few buttons and we're good to go. That's
exactly like in the end, it's all about allowing you to as quickly and easily express a solution to the problem of, I've got a mission giver. This mission giver is going to dispatch you to deal with with bad guys. The variables wind up becoming, well, how many bad guys and how quickly are they going to reinforce themselves, and are they going to be are they going to be flying capital ships or little small hornets, and what kind of stuff will they have on board, and in what areas of the solar system will this conflict be taking place. So these are all things that we can bend as appropriate depending upon what we think you're capable of, or what that NPC would theoretically think you're capable of.
Yeah. Well, and we talked a little bit about the procedural character generation in the last USPU sync that we did for Star Citizen Live, but that's going to be taken into account. The back end is going to be generating more and more difficult NPCs based on the gear, based on the quality of the stuff that they can do, their behaviors. So all that needs to get fed into the mission and become part of how we reward the players and enhance that experience. But these are all things that are going to be fed into the mission instead of just the static data that we kind of have right now.
Like you literally have to place nodes in the mission script logic that says like spawn this kind of thing if we roll this, and this kind of thing if we do that. And it's just
time. And this is all data that we, as long as we can get it up front, we can pass that into the mission ahead of time and actually show that in the mission write-up. It's like, here's a mission that's going to take you here, who's offered by this guy. Here's general
expect
rewards.
a medium level of resistance, or this many hazards, or
fundamentally that's why reputation is so important. Is it's your
I
would
it lets
say
us see how good you are.
It's the single most important means of progression within the game. Clearly, you can basically upgrade your character by buying different ships. You can customize your ships. You can buy different armor and weapons for your character. But in terms of granting you membership within an organization or access to areas with more or less hostility depending upon which organization you're a member of and what your reputation is within there and how this character responds to you and whether they give you the the super challenging and lucrative missions or the super easy things that basically just have you doing piddly little stuff that anyone can accomplish because they don't yet know you and don't yet trust you. That's what the reputation system is all about. We completed the as I said earlier, the basic system last year. We incorporated the reputational logic into the subsumption mission and AI language. We got the Delphi app so that you can actually see what your standing is with all these different NPCs and organizations. The one piece, the key piece of the puzzle that we're still missing is the ability of the mission system to basically, one, have the mission templates created that actually take these inputs and then be able to feed them in and have it customize itself as appropriate. And related to that is, and it's no small challenge. It is going to be a fair bit of work to adapt the UI to actually allow for this. And that's just on a brief aside, one of the big tasks remaining on the USPU group for next year is going to be refactoring the entire mission interface and converting it from the old Flash tech to the building blocks tech. And that's one of the reasons why we made some forward progress on this, and then we kind of waited because anything that we would have done over on the Flash side would have been throwaway work. And so we made the decision to basically wait to complete the last 25% of this particular puzzle until we had the correct UI foundation in place, which ultimately, A, it'll make it much easier to implement these changes that I'm talking about, and B, we're not going to have to design it, throw it away, and then design it again.
And it doesn't mean that the players won't be able to experience those changes in the game without the UI, right? That'll still be there, but we'll be able to present that and give you a better indication of how the mission is going to play out or what you're going to get as a result of the mission with the new UI.
And also to show you, missions that you don't have the reputation for.
Right, exactly.
It's weird that how important that is, but it actually is vital that you be able to see, hey, I'm not actually with these people. They don't know that I'm that good of a cargo hauler, so they're not going to give me this super difficult cargo hauling mission.
But you got to know what you're striving towards too, as well, right? It's I want to get better at this. I want to do missions with these guys because that's going to push me to go and get that one right there. That offers this much extra reward or this membership here.
And I don't want to go into this. I just mean this is a topic for another day. But I was just going to briefly mention orgs, perks, benefits. So we're talking about reputation, and you can see your standing with with different organizations, with players, and we will at some point next year start to move forward with. When I say orgs, perks, benefits, you guys know what I'm talking about, which is basically all of the benefits that may, that may be conveyed upon you just as a result of being within this organization or having a certain level of stature within this organization. This may be anything from, expedited, ship deliveries. After your ship gets blown up, you don't have to basically, pay a fee to basically, get it as quickly as possible. That's automatically covered. You may get, discounted prices at certain shops. You may, simply not get a hostile response from pirates in this area if you're a member of, of the Pirates Guild and things of that sort. And so this plays into what we're talking about here because you're able to look at an organization, you're able to understand what kind of benefits it conveys to its most exalted members, and then you can decide whether or not you want to basically try to increase your ranks within there. And in terms of doing that, the challenge is simply having enough mission variety and diversity to enable the player to feel, hey, I started out, he didn't trust me, he gave me the real simple, not particularly lucrative mission, and I've been working on this for days and days and days, and I've been moving up in terms of the difficulty that I faced, in terms of the reward that I was offered, and finally I got to the promised land, and now I basically have membership within the organization, and now I can basically go to grim hex and have no concern that the local pirate organization is basically going to assault me.
Terrorists aren't going to shoot at you, etc.
And importantly, like that is something that makes your character unique. In an MMO, it's very important that you bring something to the table that other members of your friend group might not have, frankly, or your organization. You have to come in and say, hey, I actually have access to this really cool mission or this really cool thing, and by doing that, I can make things cooler for my group, and we encourage that community play that is so vital.
Yeah, that actually brings to mind, right now we've historically had this faction system that we use to determine hostility. It's always been one of these systems that we know we're going to change it. We know that it's not sufficient, for where we're eventually going. It's just never, it's never been a high enough priority. We're getting to the point where we're going to have to resolve this because the rest of the game is getting complex enough to where it's really starting to fray at the seams. So earlier this year we released the Xenothreat mission, and that was still entirely based upon the faction system of hostility, and that imposed a serious limitation in that while players could join up and basically fight on the side of the UE and try to repel the Xenothreat invaders, there was no real officially sanctioned means of you joining the side of the bad guys, the Xenothreat. You could go shoot the players that were supporting the UE. You could shoot the UE itself. You could get a crime stat, but the Xenothreat would still view you as hostile. They would still engage you, still try to kill you, etc. This was something that we got right up to the very end with Ninetales, and it was driving you and I crazy.
Yes.
And we wanted to fix it, and we put in what equates to, I'd say, it's a temporary hack to where what we can effectively do is allow a faction to override its normal dislike of someone in another faction based upon whether or not they have a particular mission token in their inventory.
Well, it's if they're doing a certain mission at this time. And that is honestly not how we want to do this.
100%. So in this particular case, if you accept the support Ninetales mission,
suddenly everyone
then
flips.
They would normally view you as hostile, but because you're holding that that token, that mission reference, they'll go ahead and grant you an exemption. But this is it is clumsy. It was viewed as a very temporary solution. The long-term solution that we've always discussed is going to a more reputational based hostility system. Can you go into a little bit of detail about why that's so important and what kind of additional things we'll be able to support in the future when we have such a more flexible system?
Sure. I mean, the why it's important is fairly obvious. Like, if I have to make sure that you have a certain mission in order to do something, then I can't say, for instance, you can't go to Grimhex. I'm sorry, you're on the side of the police. Like, they will shoot you. That is a problem. No, right now, like, they are actually just civilians, so that they don't care, essentially. If it's reputation, it's something that persists. It doesn't matter if you have a mission or not. You have done something that has made these people like or dislike you, and no matter where you go and what you do, unless that changes, they are going to attack you or not attack you, and you can kind of count on that.
Well, your actions have an impact on how the world perceives you, right? And it's especially important, like as we go into Pyro, as there's multiple factions that are kind of at war with each other out there. We want the players to be able to get in good with one or the other.
Exactly.
So it's a change that we know we need to make, and I think it's really going to take shape and form as we go into Pyro, because UE in Stanton is a pretty binary thing. There's little pockets of pirates, but it's not like Pyro, where it's going to have like these very distinct groups that are kind of warring with each other, and the reputation system is perfect for that.
It will allow us to open up also just like an entire branch of content. Like, we don't really have missions where you work with criminals for the criminals. There's nothing that really makes you a long-term criminal player. Your crime stat can be wiped. You can kind of get rid of that source. It's not something that I am a criminal player and I log in and I'm going to do these kinds of things. I'm going to be on this side of things. These people hate me. These people love me. That allows you to define your character. That allows you to define your play style. That allows you to define where you're going to do and what you're going to do in the game. The entire game shifts if you have the ability to say.
I would say it's much more like the real world, to where it's the concept of hostility. It eventually equates to binary. Either I engage you, either I attack you, or I do not. But in between, there's literally just a sea of grays in terms of this organization hates that one, this one likes this one, this one doesn't like this one's neutral towards that one, etc. And you wind up having inevitably some sort of unique mixture of all of these different things. And so in the end, we will prioritize these things and determine it's like, oh, well, you're a member of the walk old ladies across the street. Well, I like that. Oh, but you're also a member of the Pirates Guild. I really hate that. So even though I like that one, I'm still going to attack you. And so it's much more flexible in terms of determining all of these complex relationships that players are eventually going to instill upon their characters. Like, it's not going to be either I'm left faction or right faction. It's like there's going to be lots and lots of different organizations, lots of different NPCs, and your standing with those will be all over the map. Some players will be in really good standing with this, some players will be really low on this other one, and the level of variability that we'll be able to support with with the reputation system is just going to be far, far superior to what we have now. Dorsey, you implemented the Ninetales mission, which allowed players to fight on either side of the conflict. How does the gameplay experience differ depending upon which side you choose to support? And can you explain how this actually, in the end, wound up being a server optimization of sorts?
Well, I mean, you kind of hit the nail on the head. What happens differently is if you are on the lawful side, you are working for Crusader Security, they are sending out scanning ships to try and locate the Ninetales fleet. And you have to go and protect those. And then once you have found that fleet, you go and destroy that fleet. You are killing ships until you basically deplete their resources and make them retreat from the area. On the Ninetales side of that, you are of course going and hunting those scanning ships. You are given their locations and you're told, hey, go destroy these. And then once the fleet portion of it gets found, you go and try to defend that fleet. And if you can hold them off for long enough, then Ninetales will actually win, and Crusader will be unable to drive them away before they achieve their objective, essentially, which is a hidden objective that we aren't revealing at this time.
But we are now.
But, well, the genesis of this, though, Ninetales was not originally actually supposed to be a PvP event at all. It was much like Xenothreat's supposed to be just pure PvE. That had performance problems, frankly. Spawning enough ships in a pure giant fleet battle to challenge 30 to 50 players made the server just tank. It was incredibly painful, and it just didn't play very well. It also, to be honest, was the same thing as what Xenothreat already had done, and I wanted to do something a little different. And that kind of combined into this push to get the aforementioned kind of duct tape solution for hostility in, so that you can align on both sides, and by doing that, I make it so that I don't need to spawn ships to challenge 30 to 50 people. If things are running smoothly, I have 25 versus 25, and I don't need to spawn really just about anything.
Right. You bring the NPCs in just to flesh out, to even the odds, to get the challenge, to the level you need. But when you actually have players that will legitimately fulfill a particular role, you take advantage of that.
Yeah.
It was a creative way to load balance the mission and the population in the area.
I would say, though, that in general, this is 100% exactly what we do want to do, which is we want to give the players the total freedom to basically do whatever they want, and then, as I always say, it's like, they live with the consequences, they live with the repercussions of their actions. If you go and support Ninetales, if you support Xenothreat, it's like that will have an impact on how people view you. The aforementioned reputation system, and you're standing with with key NPCs within the game, and how the UE views you, and whether or not certain organizations want to allow you within their ranks. And some of these things you do will have long-standing impact, to where if you ally yourself with a group, like the Ninetales, you may be prohibited from joining some organization that you've been aspiring to for a very long time.
Unless you do something to work that back. Like, you gotta
and
earn
it's a
that
balance,
trust.
right? And we want those scales to go one way or the other. It's not that we want you to be able to be perfect with everybody all the time. Like it comes at a cost.
It depends upon the severity, right? Which is, if you do jaywalking, well, then sure, someone is not going to find it that difficult to basically assume that from now on you'll stay on the right side of the law, so we'll go ahead and let you into our transport guild. If, on the other hand, you're committing acts of piracy and murder and everything else, it's like, oh, well, now I'm not sure that I actually want you in our organization, which adheres to all the laws of the nearby area and everything of that sort.
That element of being able to pick your side and do what you want to do in the game is something that, because of that, we want to allow in pretty much every piece of our content going forward.
It needs to be
as much as possible.
Ingrained in the game with everything else.
The only reason we haven't traditionally supported it is it's
the tech.
It's well, and to a large degree that you can call out a few specific pieces of the tech, right? Which is the reputation system certainly plays a role. The lack of a reputation-based hostility system. We're still using the old faction system. For Xenothreat, that was literally the #1 reason why early in the development process we nixed it. On Ninetales, we were literally within weeks of release, and it was going to bother me to put out a second one that had the exact same limitations as the first, and so despite the fact that it was going to be an unattractive hack to fix it, I wanted to fix it. It completely changed the experience, and so it is what I always refer to as it's duct tape. We'll get some value out of it as soon and as quickly as we can. Convert the hostility system over to the proper reputational version. We'll do that, but in general, for the short run, we can continue to use this hack for some other missions that we have in the hopper. And
once we have that reputation version in, we will update Ninetales to handle that, and it will play better as a result.
Yeah, that's actually another point that I wanted to touch on a little bit, which is, so we did Xenothreat, and we released it, and then we basically brought it back and did some relatively mild alterations. We changed how 2 middle phases basically transitioned automatically between them as opposed to being distinct, so that we could have the whole salvage process, and then you had the climactic battle, and it kind of rolled around, but there was still salvaging during the later part. On Ninetales, we basically released it, and you've already identified a number of shortcomings with it that you want to address, not just for 3.15, but even beyond that. And this is something. So I want to get to that in a second, but this is something that we're going to continue to do with a lot of these dynamic events. They're intended not as one-shot missions. You play them for a month, a quarter, 6 months, and then we lose interest and we move to other stuff. The basic idea for these things is these events represent some sort of
archetype, almost?
Yeah, well, I'd say they represent, it's almost like a customized chunk of gameplay. It's pirates have locked down an area, or Xenothreat has decided to invade the solar system, or pirates have basically run amok, over in this area, or drug runners have completely seized control of these manufacturing facilities, et cetera, et cetera. And the idea is that we'll have all of this information over within Quantum, and then we'll look within our extensive library of these events, and we'll decide which one most closely matches that. We'll customize it as appropriate and then trigger it. And so the idea is that we're layering all of this custom handcrafted designer content onto this systemic background. And so we really get the best of both worlds. We get a nice, logical, systemic universe that ebbs and flows, it evolves, it basically changes logically in response to player actions. But at the same time, we get all of the incredible stories and the explicit dialogue and the intricately designed challenges that a designer has put a lot of time and thought and effort into doing. And so you really get both of these blended together. But back to Ninetales, so on 3.15, we're going to tweak a couple of the problems that you've identified. So you want to start with that?
They're relatively small things, honestly, just due to the schedule. It's probably the most impactful one and the one that I've seen the most people talking about. There is a portion of Ninetales on the lawful side where you can deliver medical supplies to the blockaded station for a bit of an extra reward. They will pay you a little bit more if you have a certain mission, and also their inventory is just very rapidly depleting, so you can pretty much always sell there, and you will be selling at the best price that they can offer. The problem that occurs there is that everybody buys all of the medical supplies out there. And while that's really cool on a realism statement, with the game in the state it is and with trading in the state it is, that means that a lot of people can't participate in that part of the mission, and that's problematic, particularly at this point where we want to be testing how those play. We really want people engaging in that part of things. Those of you who were part of the first wave of Evocati when we first tested this way back might actually remember that we originally had shop modifiers on the places that were selling medical supplies to make it so that they had a higher inventory that refreshed fairly frequently so that everyone could kind of engage in that. We were asked to remove those so that we could emphasize the derelicts, which are around the station that you can take medical supplies off of, because basically the derelicts made it so that there was another way to get those medical supplies, but they didn't. It took so much more time that there was really no reason to do that if you could do the
it actually goes back to what you were talking about earlier, which is I can buy them instantaneously from the shop and there's no loading time, and then I can move them over here and I can instantly unload them. If I had to physically pull them off, you could more easily balance these things. Whereas right now, I really do have to go manually pull each individual one off of the derelict ship. And so I'm incurring all of the the physicalized cargo expense on one side and not on the other. And so in the end, sure, just due to the sheer amount of time, it's like it takes me 30 minutes to get 12 boxes this way, or I can go buy 50 boxes, in a split second. Which one are you going to do?
Some people might still do the derelict because they're fun, frankly. It's a fun little FPS raid, but a lot of people are going to look at the dollar signs and just go, okay, this is obviously the better option. That being said, we're probably going to put back in, it's actually a pretty easy, I left them in there because I had a feeling we might want them back. We're just going to flip a switch and probably put those shop modifiers back in. We've seen how people play the derelicts. There's plenty of them in Xenothreat. We want to see the trading, frankly, and so that will allow that to come back online. Another relatively small change that is probably going to be coming in, we are seeing that many people are not engaging with the criminal side of things, and that is very much like the whole thing that we were doing with making it into a PvP mission for the purposes of helping performance.
We're going to have to better entice them to basically fight on the side of the Nine Tails.
We need to entice them. So that means, they already are being paid more than the other side. I'm probably going to up that even more, frankly. They are going to become very lucrative, hopefully. That is the short-term solution.
And this is where, ideally, helping out the Nine Tails building reputation, ideally, we would be able to offer other benefits of being in that organization, other things that some percentage of the players would aspire to and want, other rewards that you get for building up your standing with them.
Which won't be for 315, 100%. But that is definitely where that is intended to go. The other thing that we might want there is a system to dynamically modify jurisdiction, because one of the big punish points that happens to a criminal when they are helping on that side in that area, despite the fact that Ninetales has supposedly taken over this area, when they get killed, they go to jail, which is a bit weird, frankly. We originally did want to make it so that you wouldn't get brought to jail, but there just wasn't enough time to fit the tech into the schedule. There still won't be for 315, but that is a longer term thing that we want to have, is the ability to kind of dynamically modify these jurisdictions.
That sheds light on a problem, right?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. It was one we kind of saw coming, but frankly, it was good to have it confirmed, and now we can hopefully put some pressure on that happening.
Yeah, we have a lot of those. We added this, we added the shop modifiers, we had the probability volume modifiers, we added the ability to do, the quantum lockdowns, through the dynamic events and stuff. We haven't yet added the ability to add the dynamic population modifiers. And so this one was, as you said, we knew this was going to be an issue. You can't necessarily get everything you'd like into every release. And so the point is, we got Ninetales out. You had some other longer term things that you wanted to address as well. Can you talk about those?
Well, some of them, frankly, are just things that are going to be things that will naturally happen, to be honest. Performance is still a big problem.
I do want to talk to the performance thing for a second, which is
some progress. It's been definitely better.
We basically generated something on the order of 120, 130 different individual gyros that people were addressing in the run up to Xenothreat. Because what inevitably winds up happening is we get performance to a certain level, and then we're basically adding more locations. We're basically enhancing the AI logic. We're adding new functionality, and so it's always a running battle to where you're adding more you're adding more stuff as you're making other stuff run faster, and so you tend to get a net wash. And we actually found ourselves with Xenothreat. One of the reasons we held it for a couple of extra weeks was we wound up finding ourselves in a very bad spot to where there are inevitably there are problems now. We're very familiar with them. They were much worse, just a few, when we were originally supposed to release it. We fixed it was an endless litany of these things, to where it's like, on profiles, things showing up, stalling the main thread 100 milliseconds, 200 milliseconds. Those are getting cut down to a millisecond here, 2 milliseconds. But there's just such a quantity, and so what I want to touch on a little bit is as we finalized some bits of tech, like part of the reason we were able to devote as much time to getting things back into at least what I'd call an acceptable state, not a great state. We've got a lot more work to do to get this thing to the level of performance we want. There's a lot of problems, the rubber banding that we're intimately familiar with. We absolutely positively want to deal with it. It drives us. We all hate it. We want to fix it. But as some of these people roll off of things like their server meshing, tasks and stuff, we're now getting to the point to where we can keep people focused on this particular problem for, certainly a longer period of time than they've been able to do in the past.
It's just a matter of that being the focus.
That's exactly it. It's just a matter of it being the focus.
A lot of the engineers that are working on server meshing are the people that would be fixing these optimization problems, right? So your game's going to run as fast as your biggest bottleneck, and that's about it, right? And you're going to hit the next one and the next one, and you're going to keep fixing them until your game runs a little better.
It was almost an endless litany of spawn stalls, entity, deletion stalls, and it was impressive to see how quickly those guys were eradicating, some of these really, really
big
egregious, performance, impactors.
Like 300-400 millisecond spikes going down
to one or two milliseconds.
Right?
Absolutely.
Enormous.
We spend a lot of time crafting to make sure that these waves are coming at the appropriate amount of difficulty for the number of players that are there and all this stuff. And if the spawn queue starts to slow down, that kind of snarls. It just doesn't work. You can't design a great experience. You can design an okay experience, but not a great one.
As you know, on Ninetales, I know we played with this quite a bit. We definitely did on Xenothreat, where it's like, well, we want to bring in 10 guys at once to present a certain amount of challenge, but then you got to spawn them all simultaneously, and so we wind up bringing them in one at a time. So we're basically distributing the spawn load over time. And while it's true that on average the amount of challenge you're going to face will be identical, there is a big difference between 10 ships showing up at once versus one. And it was the same thing with the number of capital ships was originally larger, and we had to whittle that down. And so as the performance gradually improves, obviously we'll basically start to expand our ambitions in terms of what we're what kind of experiences we're actually putting out there for players.
And the existing ones will just improve, frankly. Those missions will almost become new beasts just by the very nature of that happening. And that's what, when you say what is the long-term thing, that to me is the biggest thing, because a lot of these events will just be better.
You're currently working on a sequel of sorts called Jumptown V2. Can you go into some more detail about what players can expect from that with the initial release?
Yeah. It's actually, I'm trying to keep it very, very simple. Jumptown was originally this community event, and I want to keep that vibe as much as possible. I'm trying to have a very light hand. So what I'm doing is I'm basically taking a location. I'm going to make it so that it starts to spawn physically a bunch of boxes of a very lucrative material, in this case maize, commodity, and that will then, it'll start to spit that out at a certain rate, which will entice people to go there and collect it, put it on their ships, fly it away, whatever. But the point there is that is an area that will be very, very lucrative for a short period, which will entice a lot of people to conflict over it. When you've got a place that is popping out a box of maize for free that you can just pick up at every 30 seconds or so, that is dollar signs, and people will kill for that. Not only because it's fun, but also because it's worth it, frankly. So essentially, there is a location, there is a thing that spawns these boxes, and I'm going to turn it on, and that's about it.
One of the things I didn't like about the original Jumptown was it was at a fixed location, and it was always on, and it basically spit these things out at a certain frequency.
Outside of the fact that it was a bug, but yeah.
So, but it was
very static.
Yes, that's exactly it. And in general, I hate static things because it's always the same. So let's talk a little bit about Jumptown V2 is being designed as a dynamic event, and it's also extremely configurable. So
Yeah.
we're going to start with support for any of the drug labs,
The 3.
although that's really just a function of whether or not we could get environmental art team support
Correct.
for the other areas. Longer term, we will be able to activate this at at a wide variety of different locations.
The concept itself is pretty simple, and it can be worked at all these different places.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Sure, but there's a lot of things like we put a lot of thought into recording additional lines of dialogue to support different types of drugs or different types of commodities. We have some generic lines so that can apply to all the stuff that's
Anything. We don't want to be hampered by that, because the lead-in time for getting that dialogue can be a little bit damaging to doing just quick ads, frankly. Like, we want to be able to just say during a quarter, hey, it'd be really cool if there was an underground facility that was pumping out data or metal or at a refinery, and we want people to fight over that, and we can just add that because we planned ahead.
So we've got dynamism for Jumptown V2 with respect to location. We've got dynamism with respect to what exactly it's going to be pumping out. Another one that I wanted to support was the quantity. In other words, how long will this thing be spitting it out? Is it going to spit out 100, 100 SEU of cargo, or 1,000, 100 units of drugs, or 10,000? And this was something, again, so it's been configured as a dynamic event to where it can have this information passed into it and then configure itself as appropriate.
At runtime. Like, that means whoever or whatever, if
That's the critical part.
It currently is launched by a person who is literally like pressing a button on a page. And when they do, they can enter in a bunch of variables, and those will determine where it's happening, what it's spitting out, how long it's going to last, how fast.
Yeah, I'll actually talk about that a little bit later, to where right now, all of the events that we've launched so far are triggered, via Quasar, and a person goes in, specifies the event, specifies the inputs,
and you'll talk about it being
100%.
driven.
Jumptown V2, another one of the specific design objectives was to use it as the first test case for these systemic